Happy Swim Tech Tuesday. Whilst we're not allowed to swim yet, we're not allowed open water swimming or to travel to open water swimming, and we can't get in the pool, there are things we can do. And with hopefully restrictions lifting in the next couple of months, it's good to be ready to get swimming from the word go. So one thing we can do is do land work. So we can do a lot of strength work to get ourselves ready, a lot of upper body strength, a lot of core strength, a lot of mobility, make sure there's flexibility around the shoulders and around the chest and around the back. But we can also do work with bands. They're great for warm-ups when we can get in the water again, or for racing. They're great for fitness work, generating a bit of lactate build-up in the shoulders and aerobic capacity as well. But it's also good for doing technique work, which I think often gets forgotten. Technique work is thinking about making sure that your technique's sharp. It could be reminders, especially at the moment when we've not been in the water, or it could be proprioception, getting the idea that certain parts of the stroke, like the front of your stroke, you're trying to get that catch, you're trying to bend your elbow, that's the first thing you do. So you get that proprioceptive feel, that feel of what that action is, so that when we get in the water, you know exactly what you're feeling for. You don't need anything fancy to do swim work at home. A simple TheraBand, piece of elastic cord, won't cost more than £1 or £2. You could get some nice resistance bands with handles on the end of them. That's the next step up. And there are specific swim cords with paddles on the end of them, so they make it even more like swimming. It's not exactly like swimming, but it makes it more like swimming, so it feels like you've got the pressure flat on your hand rather than just holding onto a handle. And obviously that's going to help mimic the feel of the water, make sure our hand stays flat and that we don't start trying to crunch our hands down into fists and keep everything flat. Equally, you can do with bands pulled off a door handle and just bend over at the hips. But there are fancier systems around. Zen8 have a swim bench, which is essentially an inflatable bench that's narrow enough that you can lie on it. So it means that you're in a better position for your back and you're more comfortable, but you can also pull through down the sides, which being able to lie on a Swiss ball or a normal chair might not allow you the flexibility to do. So there are plenty of ways of doing it, from spending very, very little money, maybe £1, £1.50 maximum, to spending a little bit more money to make it more comfortable and more applicable and put you in a better position to be in the water. When you're swimming, or doing the cord swimming, you can just pull. You can just pull for sets of a minute or 2 minutes for half an hour, and that'll give you an aerobic workout, but it's not the most productive use of your time. So this video is hopefully going to show you some ways that you can get the most out of your time with the bands. So first up, that setup. Making sure you're far enough away from the anchor point so you've got tension on your cables from the start. Next, you're going to hinge at the hips, so lean forward. So those bands should be pulling your hands forward, so you're ready then, and you can be comfortable and ready to go. And the third part of that setup is where your feet go. You could go feet underneath, just wider than your hips, or you could go one foot in front of the other to give yourself a stable base to lean over from. Either way, it's got to be what works for you, so play around with it. So if you're going to do your freestyle pull, you're going to start in that setup position with one arm out in front, and you're going to make sure your arm is reached as far forward as you can without your shoulder popping up close to your ear. If your shoulder pops up close to your ear, you lose control of it, which means it'll make it a lot more difficult to think further back and generating power. The next part is to think about that catch. So thinking about bending your elbow so your forearm points towards the ground. And then you want to think about accelerating everything back, but keeping everything vertical, because that's where you want. It'll mean you're pushing everything backwards rather than grabbing and pulling at something. It means that you keep that tension on the cable all the time. If you're losing tension, if the cable is bouncing around all the time, that's equivalent to you in the water slipping and cutting through the water, which means you're losing that distance per stroke that you're aiming for. You're losing power, you're losing energy. So you're thinking from the front, control the water, get into that vertical position, that catch, engaging with the water or engaging with the band, and then accelerating everything back past your hips. You're not likely to do recoveries with the bands because the band's going to want to pull your arm over the top, and because you haven't got that ability to rotate your shoulders and hips in the same way, that's going to put a bit of strain on your shoulders. If you're in a position where you can move a little bit, if you've got a bench and you can lean to one side, you can control your arm forward, but that's probably better if you're a little bit stronger, a little bit more experienced, and a little bit more controlled with your swimming. You could also do butterfly pulls, and butterfly pulls are exactly the same as front crawl, but doing both arms at the same time. So rather than going alternate one arm and then the other, you're going to do both arms at the same time. So you start at the front, bend, and accelerate back. So you're still thinking about getting those elbows up and out, forearms pointing down, and driving everything back, using your lats, squeezing everything back towards your thighs. So when we're doing our front crawl pulls, there are three main things to think about. The first is the reach, making sure that our hand starts hopefully level with our shoulders. The second is that catch, that control of the water, that engagement where we're getting into that vertical position by bending your elbow. And the third is that acceleration back past your thighs, making sure your forearms still stay vertical and you're squeezing everything back using your back muscles. You start nice and long, arms reach forward, bend and push, bend and push, bend and push. You can do it as slow as you like to make sure that control is there. And the important thing is you maintain that tension in the cable all the time. There's no bouncing around of the cable through every pull. We can always go from there and do butterfly pulls. Butterfly pull being the same as front crawl, just doing both at the same time rather than one at a time. Again, we start, both arms reach forward in line with the shoulders. You bend and push, bend and push, bend and push. All the time thinking about getting that forearm as vertical as you can. As a bit of variety, whilst you may not do breaststroke when you're racing, and you might not do much in your swimming in the pool, to give your shoulders a bit of a break, to give everything a little bit of a different feel, you could do breaststroke pulls with the bands as well. And with that, you're going to be leaning forward with both arms out in front, and you're going to make small circles. You're going to think about sweeping out, squeezing out, and then bending your elbows and bringing your hands in towards your chest, and then pushing everything forward. So you're making two circles with your hands. When I'm teaching the kids in the pool, I'd get them to think about running their hands around the outside of a mixing bowl. It's a silly visual image to have, but it makes it memorable. So if you're then going to do breaststroke for some variety, I'm going to set up exactly the same, lean forward, hands out in front, and you're going to make circles with your hands. Sweep out, sweep in, push forward. Out, in, forward. around the mixing bowl every single time. Same as with the front crawl, there's no bouncing up and down of the cable. It's keeping constant tension all the time. On top of doing front crawl, butterfly, breaststroke pulls, you can also do sculls. So you could do an entry point scull, squeezing in and out. You could do a midpoint scull, thinking about keeping your elbows bent but still, and pushing your forearms in and out. You could do an exit point scull with your hands by your sides. In all cases, this is reinforcing the idea that you can work on that technique, work on that proprioception, so that in 2 months' time when you're allowed in the water, this feels like second nature. When you come to put it together into a session or a set, you can do various things. You could do the number of strokes or sculls to break everything up. You could do things by time. So you could do a minute's worth of front crawl pulls and then take 20 to 30 seconds rest. You could even mix between the two. So you could do 2 or 3 minutes worth of easy swimming, easy pulls, but every minute you could do 10 strokes where you work really, really hard to mimic swimming around turn buoys or to mimic trying to catch the next group in front of you. There are so many little bits and pieces that you can do to make it varied and make it interesting, but also make it applicable to real life swimming. I hope this video has been useful, been instructional, been fun. If there's any comments, if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, any particular drills that you really enjoy. And if you've got any suggestions for other videos that I can do, I'd love to hear them because it means that I've got something to do for next week. But hopefully that was useful. Click like, click subscribe, and I will see you next time.